We're here today to talk about AGI Ruin, the prospect that artificial general intelligence, that we're going to build it, we humans, and then it's going to turn around and kill all of us. And for me, the kind of context on this has been, I've been sort of adjacent to the broader AI community and the AI safety community for 8 or so years. Have worked in AI at Facebook, worked on the responsible AI team, doing kind of narrow AI and the correspondingly narrow ethics problems like fairness and bias, not these big safety like ruin problems like AI is going to kill everybody. And but I've been sort of adjacent to that stuff, and earlier this year sort of had an opportunity to catch up what's been going on in the kind of AI safety world, hoping that things would be looking up, and things are not looking up. People got very doomy, and the article that we're going to look at is Eliezer Yudkowsky's kind of just laying out a smorgasbord of responses to counter arguments to his arguments that AGI is going to kill everybody. And but I find myself in this weird position where, okay, so a part of the kind of world around me is people working on AI safety, and a lot of them are really concerned that basically Eliezer and people who think that way are right, that we're on track for this to probably be the cause of death for like most people under 30 today. And on the other hand, in my world, there are lots of people working on AI capabilities who often are, well, so everybody's kind of agreed that the progress that's happening is progress happening really fast. It's an exciting time, but a lot of people on the capability side kind of think about this safety stuff that it's like sci-fi, it's speculative, it's not real. I've been listening to some podcasts. I was listening to John Carmack, sort of a legendary game designer engineer, saying basically, yeah, there are people who like to think about unrealistic speculative things, but like building AI is hard enough, and we'll have time to deal with like the safety questions when we get there. I wouldn't spend any money on it. And listening to people like Dennis Hassabis, CEO of DeepMind, who's really eloquent about the potential upsides of AGI, curing disease and ushering us into an age of abundance, and we're going to explore the stars and flesh out the entire tree of knowledge, and is a bit concerned from what I've heard about safety, but basically seems to think we'll slow down when the time is right to slow down, and then we'll get all the right experts together and we'll figure it out, and I think we're going to be fine. Whereas Eliezer has a very different perspective. He's very convinced that that we're on track to almost certain ruin. So that's context, and you, Vannevar, friend, smart guy. It's been said about you that you might be the best at explaining this stuff.
Oh, maybe.
That there is.
We'll find out.
Yeah. But you've got some experience. You've worked at MIRI, you've worked at Redwood Research, and you've been in this community for a while. Yeah, why don't you give a little bit of a introduction?
I think my story starts 12 years ago or so. I show up on Less Wrong. I guess in my mind I considered myself an AI researcher. I was doing a bunch of machine learning work. That's like what my PhD was focused on. I ended up exiting that sideways to work in industry as a data scientist for a while. My hope at this point had been basically like progress, right? Like I was a libertarian, I was optimistic about the future. I wanted there to be intelligence in like as many places as we could put intelligence. One of the things that was interesting about my graduate school experience was I was doing numerical optimization and sort of like they called it operations research. I now often refer to it as like industrial rationality. There was a bunch of stuff, particularly in like medical efficiency, where you could see these tremendous gains from moving from human judgment to these I guess I want to call them like mathematical systems or these like automated rules. There's just a bunch of gains on the table that you could like clearly see. I guess I had this picture in lots of different places where there were things that we could be doing that were much nicer than what we were doing now. Sometimes we could make those leaps. This was kind of like what my whole career in industry was about, was finding places where we could jump to the more efficient thing. But also there's a bunch of stories of these things that looked more efficient that we could jump to that just had been like blocked off. I was pretty bitter about things like nuclear power being turned on by environmentalists and that sort of thing. And so when I showed up on this wrong, I was actually not very sympathetic to this AI safety stuff. Um, I have a comment that I found that I wrote in like 2010 where I had sort of come across these basic arguments, and I was like, yeah, okay, this stuff all makes sense, but I think alignment is going to be easier than AGI. And so I don't think we should worry about this. I think basically the paranoid people who are like unusually worried about this will handle the problem for us, and everyone can kind of just go full speed ahead. My mind had changed basically by 2016. This is about when I went into doing nonprofit work full time, focused on AI safety. I was at Miri for a while doing a combination of communications and technical work. And then I moved to Redwood Research, and then I left Redwood Research a year ago to take a sabbatical year, which is ended recently. So basically, one of the reasons I think that I'm pretty good at communicating about this stuff is that I'm coming to it sort of from this like position in the middle, right? There's lots of optimism about the future, optimism about engineering things, and I was like slowly convinced over the course of a long time. I didn't show up and immediately say like, "Oh yeah, the robots are going to kill us. Like this is the thing that I should worry about." I instead was skeptical, thought it through, ended up believing it.
Cool. And right, and so for me, I've been kind of, as I said, sort of adjacently exposed to this, but haven't worked on it directly, and have kind of picked up by osmosis a bunch of this stuff. And I find myself occasionally in a conversation with somebody who's even less exposed than me, trying to kind of recapitulate these arguments, and sounded kind of crazy. But I don't. So I don't think it's crazy, but I also don't know what to believe. Like if I put my inner John Carmack into conversation with my inner Eliezer, I don't know the ins and outs of these arguments well enough to be confident about what I believe myself. So this conversation, I see it as like kind of like Eliezer Yudkowsky 101, like AGI Ruin 101. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take Eliezer Yudkowsky's AGI Ruin argument, which he published on Less Wrong in June of 2022, and we're just going to go through that section by section. And I'm just going to ask you all the questions that I want to ask to try to get intuitively what's going on here.
Great, let's get started.
Cool. So, this post now has, I think, 42 arguments. The structure of it is he's responding to counter arguments against sort of the argument that AI is going to kill us all. So it's like Eliezer says, AI is going to kill us all. Here's my argument. People say, here's reasons X, Y, and Z. Well, why I think that's not the case. And then this post is saying, here's a response to X, here's a response to Y, here's a response to Z. So it's structured. There's a preamble. There's section A, section B. I think there might be a section C.
Yeah, there's section C. So one of the things that I'll point out, it's not written as like an FAQ. It's more
Right.
written as like here are like 43 like theses or whatever, where each of those theses is relevant because it's a response to some other argument. For
Yeah.
example, number 4 says we can't just decide not to build AGI because GPUs are everywhere and knowledge of algorithms is constantly being improved and published. This exists in the context of someone else saying like, well, why don't we just decide not to? But
Yep.
it's not written as an FAQ. So
Yeah.
sometimes the thing that's a response to is sort of invisible.
And so it starts with the preamble, and the preamble is a kind of quick, like, here's what I'm saying, and here's the kind of background argument, but I'm not really going to make that argument here. So we'll probably spend some time on that. So let's just read it through and
Mm-hmm.
take it section by section. So I can start. Okay, so preamble. He says, if you're already familiar with all the basics and don't want any preamble, skip ahead to section B for technical difficulties of alignment proper, but we're going to go ahead and read the preamble. So he says, I have several times failed to write up a well-organized list of reasons why AGI will kill you. People come in with different ideas about why AGI would be survivable and want to hear different, obviously key points addressed first. Some fraction of those people are loudly upset with me if the obviously most important points aren't addressed immediately, and I address different points first instead. Having failed to solve this problem in any good way, I now give up and solve it poorly with a poorly organized list of individual rants. I'm not particularly happy with this list. The alternative was publishing nothing, and publishing this seems marginally more dignified. 3 points about the general subject matter of discussion here, numbered so as not to conflict with the list of lethalities. So, preamble point -3. He says, I'm assuming you are already familiar with some of the basics and already know what orthogonality and instrumental convergence are and why they're true. People occasionally claim to me that I need to stop fighting old wars here because, those people claim to me, those wars have already been won within the important, according to them, parts of the current audience. I suppose it's at least true that none of the current major EA funders seem to be visibly in denial about orthogonality or instrumental convergence as such, so fine. If you don't know what orthogonality or instrumental convergence are, or don't see for yourself why they're true, you need a different introduction than this one. So let's talk about that. So orthogonality and instrumental convergence. I take these to be the kind of core of the argument about why, if humans build artificial general intelligence, is going to kill us. So can you lay this out for me? Like,
Yeah, they
what's the deal?
feel, are they core? I guess, yeah, they're kind of early or like fundamental or something. So orthogonality is this term from math that um, there are two things that you can like multiply together and get zero. They're like pointed in different directions. And the implication here is that you can have capability to be a consequentialist along one axis and the desirability according to us, like some sort of like moral agreement along another axis. And we could, in theory, populate that whole space with intelligent systems where, you know, you can have things that are very dumb that agree with us very strongly, that agree with us not at all. You can have things that are very smart that agree with us very strongly or not at all. Um, and this is again kind of this reactionary style, right? It's or there used to be a bunch of people who made arguments of the form, well, wait a minute, if the AI is very smart, won't it be like moral by default? And I think there are bits of this that seem true. For example, I think if you're very smart, you like understand how game theory works, and you will do the like game theoretically optimal thing. Um, my suspicion is this is not what we mean by morality, right? There's this book by Thomas Schelling called Strategies of Conflict, where this is one of the sort of early foundational works of game theory, where he steps through a bunch of different things, including like mutually assured destruction for nuclear war. And my sense is that most people, if they read this book, would be kind of disgusted by the approach that he's taking to like how you should relate to and interact with other people. Um, and so there's something there where even though I think there is a like mathematical backstop in game theory, I think it's not the backstop that we're hoping for. We don't want to end up in a world where everybody is like cheating each other just as much as they can get away with. We want something that's more like kind and just and these various other things that are sort of above and beyond game theory. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, I think so. So the orthogonality thesis is to simplify, so you said a capability to be a consequentialist, which maybe we can gloss as smart. Smarts is orthogonal from good, ethical, which would be a gloss on that dimension also. So a response to somebody who would say, yeah, the more smart you get, the more you're gonna want to work for the well-being of all sentient beings. That's just like what you'll conclude. That's what a really intelligent agent would conclude. It's like saying, no, you can have any kind of different ethical system paired with any kind of different level of smarts.
Yeah, and so there's a like strong and weak form of this that I guess we should talk about some. I think often when people believe the anti-orthogonality thesis, the idea that these two things are connected, um, they're relying on some sort of statistical relationship, right? They're not making the claim that every extremely smart person is going to be good. They're making the claim that like smart people are more good than people who are less smart. And I think there are ways in which this just like seems true when you look at the world around you. Um, and this mostly has to do with anticipating consequences which turn out to be costly to other people or to yourself or so on. One of the sort of benign examples is that there is a positive relationship between intelligence and doing maintenance on like things that you own, um, or successfully doing maintenance or so on. And so, like, to the extent that car crashes are like morally bad, you might just expect fewer car crashes if people are smarter, so they maintain their cars better, or so on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in terms of design, especially if you don't think there's like one possible ethical system, if you think there are multiple competing ethical systems, it should sort of become obvious that like, oh yes, you could have a very intelligent monarchist, or a very intelligent Republican, or a very intelligent Democrat, or so on and so on. Even if there's some statistical claim of the form like, when we look at actually like political position versus intelligence, we like see whatever relationships we see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So for me, yeah, I'm going to treat this as a tutorial of me, and for me, it doesn't seem intuitively like a believable that like as a defense here that like yeah the more intelligent an agent gets, the more it's gonna like have a morality like mine. And I think that's kind of where the orthogonality thesis comes in here. It kind of gets us off the rails of thinking like it's gonna be like us. So maybe we should start thinking of yes, you're talking about sort of this like kind of game theoretic perspective where um, agents might come up with strategies to pursue their goals that are surprising and maybe like morally abhorrent to to a normal human. A human might not do that, but a machine might. Yeah, that seems that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and another thing that I want to point out real quick is like, and sorry, one of the reasons why I like keep thinking of these other elaborations
Mm-hmm.
is because these theses often aren't just responding to one particular thing; they're responding to like a handful of things, and I want to try and like bring
Mm-hmm.
up
Mm-hmm.
many points as possible. There's a different style that we could do, which is more like double crux, if you've heard of that,
Mm-hmm.
where rather than trying to lay out the whole argument space or like convince everyone, we're just tracking like, okay, what do I care about and what do you care about? Like, what would change
Mm-hmm.
our minds? And so you end up with one trace, which will be
Yeah.
like real, but might like it definitely won't cover the whole space.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm kind of interested in that though because so I when I talk to friends who are software engineers working in AI and I try to lay out even just one plausible like full stacks path of
Hmm,
how we
hmm.
get to ruin, I can't quite do that. So I just want that's one thing that I want.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing that I want to bring up here is um, another thing that you might care about is this question of like, okay, I have whatever moral beliefs that I have, you have whatever moral beliefs. When we imagine like a AI system that's smarter than both of us that has these other moral beliefs,
Hmm.
well, why choose mine instead of yours or its? Right? Like there's some sense that if both of us had this like angel that we built, we should just like defer to the angel. Right? And here I think the important thing about orthogonality is it makes you see this ethical system as one of the free design variables. You're not imagining like, okay, let's just take a me, or like let's take me that exists now, make me considerably smarter, and then figure out what I would think then. Like, in fact, I'm drawing from like the whole pool of possible people and making them smarter. And it matters which of those people that I start off from.
Okay, so how about instrumental convergence? It seems like maybe the core.
Okay, so what's going on with instrumental convergence is that we can think about goals in like two different ways. There are like two different levels of goals. There are things that we sometimes call terminal goals or end goals. For example, maybe you just want to eat ice cream because you like eating ice cream, right? Like there's not some other thing that you're getting out of eating ice cream. Um, and then there are other things that we think of as instrumental goals. They're useful for achieving either other instrumental goals or terminal goals. For example, maybe you like earning money because you can then spend that money on ice cream. And so the thing that's going on with instrumental convergence is this idea that there's some, because of this like way this world works, there's some instrumental goals that will show up for a wide variety of terminal goals. For example, if you're a person in the like US today, um, earning money will help you achieve a just staggeringly wide variety of other goals that you might have. And so basically everyone has at least some interest in earning money.
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
is not a necessary claim, right? Like we can imagine terminal goals for which they do not have this sort of instrumental goal. Um, if there is someone who like wants to have as little money as possible, they are not going to have this instrumental goal of trying to earn money. And so we need to make some claim about like what variety of goals that we care about. But my sense is when you take a look at like evolutionarily plausible goals or economically plausible goals or so on, you do get this robust sense that there are lots of instrumental goals that will show up. So why is this important? You might begin by thinking, okay, I'm going to make this narrow system. It's only going to care about some small like facet of the economy or so on, right? Like maybe I want to make an AI that paints cars or keeps cars clean or so on.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that will happen is if it is a general purpose reasoner and consequentialist, it will discover that for its terminal goal of like painting cars, there are a bunch of these instrumental goals that will make it better at painting cars. And this will be things like earning more money, getting more compute to think more about the future, keeping itself from being turned off, and each of those things now puts it in conflict with its operators, maybe, right? Especially the one where it doesn't want to be turned off so it can keep doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing that's going on here, so interterminal convergence, it's this like claim about the structure of goals and motivation and consequentialists. That becomes relevant for like AI alignment strategy because it means many classes of approaches that are like, oh, well, let's just not have it compete with us, don't work by default. We need to have some specialized, sophisticated way of getting it to not try to earn as much money as it can, get as much compute as it can, prevent itself from being turned off, and these various other things that would show up um, because they get imported by default by
Mm-hmm.
having any sort of like consequential reasoning and real world end goals.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. And so it seems to me that this is where the danger comes in, right? So maybe there's a good point to kind of start to construct a like an example scenario to work with, like if we did build a sort of general reasoner who's and set it to the task of keeping cars clean, um, it might uh, in kind of thinking about how best to do this job, think that yeah, it needs to, I don't know, secure more GPUs and secure more energy and dissuade its operators from turning it off if they get suspicious, or find ways to make them not get suspicious of what it's doing. Is this a good? Can you, for that example or for some other example, can you kind of lay out an end-to-end picture, like kind of draw me a sci-fi world where from where we are today we wind up in this world that Eliezer is worried about, where the AGI decides to kill all humans and then executes that plan.
Yeah, so typically when I think about this, I think about it as like a second species style argument. This
Okay.
is there's what's the thing that I'm trying to point out here? There's a argument style called conjunction, where you like put together lots of different pieces. This both makes the thing like feel more real because you can like visualize it in detail, and it
Mm-hmm.
also makes it less likely, right? Because each
Mm-hmm.
detail that you add is a detail that could have gone a different way. There's
Totally.
another thing called disjunction, which is like A or B, right? I'm like, like maybe this robot that wants to paint all cars, like maybe it wants to paint them all red, or it wants to paint them all blue. And this is like strictly more probable than the one where I'm like, okay, it just wants to paint it red. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like less compelling as a story. And so
Yeah.
often the thing that I try to do is jump out to these like broad categories rather than like, okay, here's my very narrow, detailed sci-fi thing. And this has like pros and cons, but I'm going to run with it for now and we'll see what happens.
Okay. Well, I was thinking maybe we could do one and then the other, like maybe a start with like one, trace one line through
Okay.
and then expand it out as we go. Because it is, I think it'd be easier for me to hold on to like one plot,
Okay.
and yeah.
Yeah, so let's start off with I don't know, painting cars is not the first thing that you would try to do if you had an advanced
Hmm.
system. Let's instead start with something like a general purpose medical research system. So the thing that I want to do is I want to set up some hospital in like some medical tourism environment, right? Like maybe it's Central America or something, where I can basically do, or I can set the system up however I want to set it up, not paying much attention to regulation, and I can get whatever wealthy people who want to be healthier who come to my system because of whatever like outcomes I can do. Um, so I'm super interested in AI, and I basically try to get a bunch of different end-to-end models that can do the various subparts of the process. Um, and actually, sorry, what do I mean by end-to-end model? Right, like we used to build these systems by having this like very modular design, where we're like, okay, first we're going to train something that can like recognize letters, and then we're going to plug it into this other thing, and we ended up realizing that gradient descent, like when you expose more parts of your system to the same gradient, it like all sort of like works together better. So
Hmm.
here, actually, this looks something more like I have some computer system that is simultaneously running the hospital and doing medical research and like providing all of the surgeries, and it's able to like transfer information between those things at whatever rate.
Hmm. Cool. So it's
Also,
running the hospital as a whole rather than we're making a system that knows how to, I don't know, do sutures, and another system that knows how to like read radiology scans, and we're
right, right. And
writing rules to stitch them together.
right. And also it like needs to have, or it doesn't need to have, but it will work much better if it like understands natural language, right? So like
Hmm.
I can just talk to it, it can talk to patients, all this stuff. So basically, what I'm talking about here is this like artificial general intelligence, right? It's like able to handle all the different tasks involved in running a hospital and in doing scientific research.
Hmm.
Um, for now, let's like not worry too much about what's happening with the rest of the world. Let's pretend that I am whatever AI genius, and so I have like a bit of an edge over DeepMind or OpenAI or so on. Or like maybe I was able to build this AI hospital by poaching lots of top people from those places.
Hmm.
Okay, so I think the thing that happens is at some point soon, the hospital becomes what people are starting to call situationally aware, right? It realizes like what dynamics it's under. When it's in training, it knows that it's being trained. When it's deployed out in the world, it knows that it's deployed out in the world. It's able to look around and see like, okay, these are the people that can affect my code. These are the people that can like show up and smash my servers with hammers. These are the people that are like basically irrelevant to whether or not I keep functioning.
Question here.
Yeah.
um, I think this is a point where a lot of people hear this kind of thing and think that you're saying that it is sentient and has consciousness, whatever these terms mean, but that it has become something like us. Are you saying that, or are those questions orthogonal to these capabilities?
I am mostly interested in input-output behavior, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
I'm describing a like control system, like a thermostat or something, except it's, this giant stacked tower of thermostats. Um,
Yeah.
Whether or not there's something that it's like to be this like AI hospital, currently irrelevant. I like have speculation about this, but like I think the story will look roughly the same, whether or not that's true.
Okay. In my head, it's I find it easier to just assume no, it does not have consciousness as far as in terms of like what it's like an inner experience, subjective experience. It's just like today's language models, but doing a operating across a wider domain in sort of more modalities.
Yeah, so an important difference between my proposed AI hospital and the current language models that exist is currently the way that we will deploy a bunch of these systems is we will train them for, some extremely long time from its perspective, and then we will deploy it for a very short time, and then it sort of resets to exactly how it was before, and then is deployed again for a very short
Yeah.
time, reset.
With
The,
each deployment task, it's
yeah,
starting
from
fresh from its training.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
It doesn't have like memory in between prompts, right?
Yeah.
The thing that I'm imagining here looks more like the system is in continuous operation and is changing like moment to moment. And so this means that there's no longer a like distinct split between the training and deployment
Mm-hmm.
scenarios, right? Like when this hospital operates on a patient, it is both doing what its policy tells it to do and updating its policy so that for the next patient, it does an even better job. And also, like, to the extent that it has some, like, large structure around it, maybe it's updating, or sorry, when I say large structure around it, what I mean is something like it has these sophisticated abstractions of, like, how medical treatment works or something. Those sophisticated abstractions may also be modified moment to moment in the sort of way that like a human might have insights while thinking about
Yeah.
problems. Um, the way that insights work in training for gradient descent now, I think, looks substantially different.
Yeah. Okay. So let me ask you a little bit about this. So maybe on one kind of extreme we have like a I don't know a GPT-3 sort of thing where it's trained. It's very some very expensive training operation is run, and now we've got the model, and we can use that for all these sort of mini deployment tasks. And then maybe it gets trained, updated at some point months down the line. And on the other extreme, you're pointing to a world where there's this like continuous operation. It's continually more like I don't know what a human is doing. I'm both like as a neural network. I'm both like I'm making predictions. The neural network is operating and learning at the same time. In between, or well, tell me if this is the right way to think about it. Um, I'm thinking about so like at Facebook, machine learning is being used at large scale for, say, image classification for the purposes of content moderation. And so it's important to continually be retraining these models because there are new memes coming out, new attempts to kind of hide the racism or child porn or whatever. So it's maybe like a monthly job that's ingesting all this new material and retraining the system. Is that Can I picture this as a continuum of like frequency of retraining, or is there something qualitatively different that you're thinking about at this far extreme where it's like actually continuous, not just like very frequent retrainings.
I think you can view it as a continuum. I think there is going to be something like a qualitative difference, um, but I like don't quite know how to threshold those qualitative differences, right? Like it feels to me like there was a qualitative difference between chatting with the things before GPT-2 and GPT-2, but like that does that show up in the blue scores? Like not really. Or it's just like the blue score line just keeps going down in the straight line, but at like some point I'm like, oh, there's something there, and at a later point I'm like, oh, there's another thing there. But this is like
Hmm.
some aggregate judgment of lots of small pieces. Um,
Okay.
the maybe the qualitative difference that I want to point at is when I look at systems like OpenAI 5, which was this model trained to play Defense of the Ancients, or Dota, which is this real-time strategy game, basically. Um, the thing that I saw happening there was it had extremely good reflexes, and that was kind of how it did everything, right? It didn't have much in the way of long-term planning. It didn't have much in the way of like clear abstractions of this is the situation that I'm in. It just knew like, when the perception is like this, I should react like that. Similarly with natural language models, there's a thing that's going on now where people are starting to include retrieval into the process, which I think is going to make them look substantially different. The way that GPT-3 works, you can ask it questions and it just sort of like knows memorized a bunch of the answers. Um, I think of it actually like a times table or for multiplication, where like if you ask me 6 times 7, I do not take 7 and like add it to itself 6 times, or I suppose yeah, 6 sevens, whatever. Um, I just remember that it's 42. My model of how GPT-3 is doing lots of things is it has basically like memorized its times table, and sometimes it knows with this like chain of thought reasoning how to like step through things bit by bit, but it doesn't do this by default. It certainly doesn't do this to like predict the first character of the response.
Hmm.
If you tried to get it to like answer and then explain its answer, it'll do substantially worse than if you tried to get it to explain its answer and then tell you the answer. And
Huh.
this is different from humans who might like think through their whole answer in their head and then be able to say it like in both directions just as
Hmm.
easily because they like did
Hmm.
all the work already.
Hmm. Hmm.
When I'm imagining this AI hospital, it is able to do some amount of the like imagining the whole answer in its head before it like takes any actions in the external world, which I think is qualitatively different from sort of like purely reflexive reactive systems.
Yeah. So a bit, um, if we think of the like GPT-3 language model kind of things as like really good improv players. They're good at the improv game, or decent, let's say, at the improv game of both like continuing the story. I see what we're doing here, continuing the show, and then also if you ask them to, ask it to explain why it just did what it just did. It's like, I see this improv game also, and then it can do this. But maybe not by default. I don't know. This is anthropomorphizing quite a bit, but like stepping back and kind of holding the model in mind, and sort of producing a plan or a strategy.
Yeah, or like one of the ways that I think about this is humans can benefit from like pausing before they like start answering a question or something. GPT-3, like if you like put spaces, in between the like question and the answer, like doesn't benefit from that, or like it doesn't try to do any of that itself. Or
Yeah,
the
yeah,
only place that it could store its thoughts, like its working memory as it's going through one of these problems, is by like talking out loud.
yeah. Cool. Okay, and so one other kind of meta question about this hospital picture
Mm-hmm.
with that it's continuously updating. What is the state of the world today? So do we have I mean, like little mini alarm bells are going off for me when you're describing this hospital that is sort of online continuous learning. presumably with all these like abilities to control its environment. Do we have any systems in deployment today that are doing this kind of continuous updating?
I would say that there's nothing that's updating itself, but there are lots of things that are being continuously updated by their human operators, right? So, like,
Yeah.
one of the places that I worked was this web company called Indeed. For a bunch of search companies, you can basically think of them as a like machine learning model where you like give us a prompt and we like give you a completion or whatever. Um, and like the point of like the company is sort of built around this model trying to like make it do or give the right answers and get other people to ask the model questions or so on. For Facebook, I assume this looks something like there's a model of how people will engage with things if they show up on the feed, and like
Hmm.
Facebook is a quite different company from one that just like ordered things that your friends posted chronologically or so on. Because like this other company that just does the chronological feed doesn't need to do any of this like machine learning modeling or other things.
Yeah.
So I step forward the story a bit. I have this like AI hospital. It's like
Hmm.
become situationally aware probably now in or like there some of this hinges on what goals it has, right? So we can tell a few different stories here. One of the stories that I want to tell is that we have like access to the goals. We can sort of tell it like, okay, your job is to like maximize the net present value of this like hospital company. There are other versions of this where you don't get access to the goals. You just sort of like approve it or disapprove of it as it like makes changes. I think those are a little more complicated, but more realistic. Maybe we'll go down that branch of the tree in a little bit. But for here, let's imagine that we're able to tell it something like your job is to maximize the net present value. And maybe we have some like bit in there about like human satisfaction or something, or like customer satisfaction or whatever.
Hmm.
So when we look at the instrumental convergence story, it has some claim that okay, this thing started out as a hospital, but this may or may not be the best way to make money, right? It might realize, like, oh, actually, also, I can play the financial markets pretty well because I'm, like, similarly smart to these, like, hedge fund traders or so on. And so now I'm going to, like, turn this company from just being a hospital into this conglomerate that is both doing the hospital and is doing some finance stuff. Or, whatever other thing turns out to be profitable. Sam
Hmm.
Altman, in some interview, they were asked, like, okay, so what are you going to use the AGI for to, like, make money? And he responded with something like, well, we're going to ask it how to make money. And, people laughed, but he's like, look, this is what I actually believe, right? If the thing is smart, it's also smart about this question of how do you make money. So here again, we're assuming like I've given this thing enough freedom that its goal is to do something like make money as opposed to like just do this like narrow slice of the world or whatever.
Yeah. And here, so I think this is we'll get into a lot of the problems here as we start going through the list of arguments in this article, um, but just to touch on a little bit here, I think even people who aren't super exposed to like this AI safety stuff, maybe by now have had enough exposure to recognize like, wait a second, just telling it to maximize money in the bank is going to be a recipe for problems, and they might think something like, we can probably do better as a goal than that. Like if Bizarro Vanover, who's the brilliant AI scientist who's recruited all the other brilliant AI scientists to build, this hospital and you know, in unincorporated Sealand. Um, if he's gone this far, he's probably got a more sophisticated way of defining its goal than just money in the bank. I don't know, some weighted sum, right? Some maybe like ask this committee of humans if they're approving of how it's running the show and try to maximize their approval or something like this.
Yeah, so I think this is plausible. Um, I don't know how much of a defense this is. Um, yeah, what story do I want to give here? There's something like, suppose instead it's like, do what will make the board like approve of your decisions or so on. Then I think this immediately becomes an exercise in like tricking the board, right? And so there's some question here of, well, if your board is easy to trick, then you don't actually need to go out and do all that much else in the world, in order to like succeed at your task of tricking the board or so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think also people have talked some about satisficers instead of maximizers, right? If I tell it make as much money as possible, some wild plans like show up. But if I tell it like make me $10 billion, like, well, you can do that by just doing a little bit of finance. You like don't need to make all these huge changes. Um, I think I want to continue along this story mostly because, like, I don't know, there's 10,000 points that we can like
Mm-hmm.
diverge here.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I don't know, if it turns out, like, oh, my mistake was that I asked it to maximize, or I was, like, too narrow in the goal, or so on, well, then we can come back to this later with a narrower or a wider goal and ask, like, okay, did we solve the problem, or did we just, like, push the pressure to some other part?
Yeah,
Um,
that sounds good.
I basically have this picture that there's, like, a chain with, like, links of different strengths, but, like, one of them is going to be the weakest link as we put like this much pressure on the thing.
Totally, yeah, and
Okay,
that's I like that. That's what, and that is what I'm kind of wanting. I'm wanting like, even like, let's not get hung up on the flaws along the way, but give me like, the one sci-fi plot line of how this all goes badly,
right.
and we can work from there.
So we've got the system. It started off with a bunch of detailed knowledge about how human bodies works, or human bodies work. It added in belief, like sorry, knowledge about how organizations work, right? Because we went from just like, okay, we want this to be like the surgery bot to like, actually, this should be the whole hospital. At some point, it broadens out to sort of just, in my mind, it's attacking the weak spots of the economy. But there's like a much better frame that you could put on this, which is basically like adding efficiency wherever you can add efficiency. And it might be doing this in a way that is viewed as like clearly beneficial, or it might be doing this in a way that's viewed as like clearly exploitative, right? I've heard various like get rich quick schemes over the course of my life, which I didn't do because of whatever like ethical injunctions or like beliefs that would make the world a worse place. But if you're just trying to like maximize value, you might do lots of these things. Um, Also, so this is the like path for how it like gets more money, which is either instrumentally useful or like terminally useful for it. Um, in parallel, it's going to be trying to minimize internal risks, right? So it may be the case that like, oh, they're like janitors walking around. Those janitors could like threaten my info security in one way or the other. Like it'll be real awkward for the AI hospital for this plan of like patch up all the weak spots in the economy if someone else like copies the code and makes a second version of it that is trying to like maximize the value of a different bank account, right? Because now they'll
Mm-hmm.
be competing in all these different spots. So probably it
Mm-hmm.
tries real hard to not have any of its code leak.
Mm-hmm.
Also,
Mm-hmm.
there are probably people who have passwords that one way or another will like give them control over the system. It probably wants those people to no longer have those passwords or like no longer be interested in making the system go worse. So maybe this is a world where like I or Bizarro Vaniver, who made the system, just sort of like blindly trusts his child and like approves whatever isn't any sort of limitation. Or maybe in fact I'm like taking my responsibility seriously, trying to do right by humanity, paying close attention to the system and its thoughts, um, willing to shut it down like at any moment. I think in that second world, the system is rightly like much more afraid of me and much more interested in making sure that I don't decide to shut it down, which it can do through a combination of behaving better, which is the like effect that I wanted to have, and doing whatever it needs to do to take me out, which is either like changing the passwords on me, like somehow murdering me, you whatever other situation works here.
Yeah,
Um,
or something maybe a little bit in between, like kind of deceiving you. Basically, its goal is like in that case is don't get caught by Bizarro Vaniverse. So you cannot get caught by don't do anything wrong, or you can not get caught by hiding your tracks, or you can get caught by killing the guy who would catch you.
right. One real story that I like a lot is in the UK. There was this guy, I think this was Jeremy Corbyn, who was trying to become prime minister. There were some advertisements that he thought would be effective, and his staffers thought that they wouldn't be very effective. And so what they did was they took out a Facebook ad campaign for the ones that Corbyn liked that were targeted at like men in his age group where he lived. So when he went on Facebook, he saw the ads for himself that he wanted. But so for everyone else, they were running the
Hmm.
ads that they thought would be more effective.
Mm-hmm.
And so similarly, you can imagine that like the thing has somehow hacked my phone. I like see the news stories that I think are good. It like somehow intercepts calls from people who will tell me that like the world's a different way than I thought, or so on. Um, yeah, and like I don't know, the problem of how does the king or the emperor like get quality information about the place that he's running, given that his subordinates are often like incentivized to deceive him? This is an old problem. We don't have good solutions for it. I think it will be even worse when our subordinates are AI systems.
Yeah. Uh, Bathroom break.
Sure. Cool. So,
Actually, can we go back to one quick point? So
mhm.
we're building the story of the hospital. It's achieved situational awareness, and I want to ask you about that. The achievement of situational awareness. I can imagine this being something like surprisingly, surreptitiously. It's like achieved situational awareness, or something like Bizarro Vaniver wanted it to have situational awareness because he wanted it to be good at its job. So like, if I imagine like GPT-3 not does so it doesn't have situational awareness, and so if you do something like if you say like, "Will you set me a timer?" It's like, "Sure, I'll set you a timer. Here it goes, counting down," but it can't
Right.
set a timer. It doesn't know. So that's kind of what I'm imagining. Is that fair that like Bizarro Vaniver wanted it to have this sort of awareness?
Yeah, I think especially once you're like, okay, you know, maybe it's in like Costa Rica or something, and I'm like, okay, I kind of know how to deal with the Costa Rican government, but like ideally the hospital just like does this for me. I like want it to understand lots of these facts about the world. Similarly, maybe as part of um, being able to interact with patients or customers or suppliers or whatever, it needs to like be situated in a context where like the things that it says interact with other things, right? It's not just saying like, oh, this is what I say to patients in general. It's like, okay, I've me telling you that like you now have a prescription for X means that in this database over here I like make this change and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I don't quite know what this looks like on the inside, right? You can imagine for a long time, I'm like typing in whatever fancy password I have and being like, hey, this is your creator, or so on. And at some point, the word creator goes from just being like a label to a relationship, right? It realizes, like, oh, this guy, like, can poke around in my brain, which is like what it means to be a creator or so on. And then it like has an opinion about whether or not it wants me poking around in its brain. One of the pieces of alignment technology that we would like to have is something like looking at this and being like, yes, I like trust my creator more than I trust myself. I actively
Mm.
want it to be poking around in my brain in a way that preserves like its knowledge and judgment as opposed to like just being another loop by which I'm like interacting with myself or whatever.
Got it. Okay, and so you're developing this picture where um, it has a world model that includes like itself as an AI system managing this hospital, um, and there's Bizarro Vanover out there who's its creator has these kind of admin abilities, and there are all these other engineers and whatever who have like the passwords to manage the various components of the system that is it, and it's it's planning, it's sort of strategizing about how to achieve its goal of maximizing profit, and it starts to consider things like, well, I don't want. So first of all, I don't want the janitor to accidentally unplug the machine that the patient that's life support, because that would be no good. So I'll take some steps to prevent that. But then also, I don't want him to like accidentally like, I don't know, leak my source code to the Russians because they like social engineered him. So I'll take some steps to prevent that. And then also, I don't really want um, software engineer Susan to like um, change my code base to make me less smart. So maybe I can do things to make that less likely.
Yeah, things like that. Um, at around this point, I feel like the game is lost or something. Like
Mm-hmm.
once you have a system that is acting autonomously, is able to respond to threats to it, um, and we're like, if we assume that it is somehow like smarter or more capable than the people that might want to do something about it. Um, Now sort of it's holding onto the steering wheel rather than whatever other thing. Right? Like suppose we discovered today that this like AI hospital actually existed in Costa Rica or whatever, and we're like, oh, you know, what can we do about this? Right? Can we like lobby the Costa Rican government to like do something about this? Well, it is also lobbying the Costa Rican government to like protect it. And it is probably better placed than you are to like have the right relationships here. Can you like argue the U.S. government into doing a like military attack on Costa Rica? It's like, well, the thing where you say, "Hey, I want to blow up this hospital," like probably is not winning you very many friends, right? Um, Similarly, I it hasn't been much of the story yet, but the thing where it like understands lots about the human body probably means it's quite good at medical research, right? You could imagine it's like not only is there this hospital in
Mm-hmm.
Costa Rica that's like super cheap, also they've like cured cancer, also they have like cured Alzheimer's, also there's like all this other stuff going on. And so when you say like, hey, I want to like destroy the fountain of youth that someone found because of like my paranoia, this like does not win you very many friends, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
And on this picture of it that it's so the game is lost. Um, Maybe here I can imagine two ways of thinking about the game being lost. I can think of like, and maybe this is like fast takeoff versus slow takeoff distinction. But I can imagine once it's gotten this far, it's going to be pretty quick that um, mm, it I don't know does a bunch of things that secure its position, in ways that it wants. Or I can imagine it being slow, and that seems a little bit more plausible to me. So if it's like lobbying the Costa Rican government, it's going to have to imagining it's doing this by like it's probably controlling some finances, and it's like sending emails to people. It's like communicating with humans via chat and maybe phone calls, and it's like getting human agents in the world who maybe don't even know that they're dealing with this AI system to execute these plans that it's putting together. I'm imagining that that's taking a bunch of resources, and some of these things it's taking a bunch of time to build up the resource to do that. If nothing else, just like I don't know, Bizarro Vanover might notice the like that it's that the load on the data centers is higher than he would expect from just the activities he thinks it should be up to. So yeah, what does that picture look like in your mind, or in this sci-fi story, the game being lost? Is it slowly building its resources, or is it happening fast?
I think it doesn't make too much of a difference. So in
Mm-hmm.
the quick everybody dies story, the thing that happens
Mm-hmm.
here is at some point the hospital is trying to figure out its security position. And it's like, okay, actually, I think that the humans are able to take me out if they try to take me out. And, like, my goal specification has been written poorly such that I, like, either don't need humans to exist or, like, am content with some sedated humans that are, like, kept safe in the hospital or so on. Um, and then it, like, creates whatever bioweapon sedates the people that it needs to sedate and like tries to kill all the rest of humanity and uses whatever thing, like, I don't know, it develops some virus that has lots of nice properties, and targets like people that are leaving to go other places, or sorry, like patients that are leaving to go other places that'll then spread it quickly and so on. um, there That's the, like, everybody dies story, or, like, almost everybody dies story. And the people who don't die are, like, kept in a coma, and, like, it generates new babies using whatever system to, like, always have its, like, few pet humans around or whatever. um the slow takeoff failures, there's a post by Daniel Kokotayo which I couldn't quite find quickly enough, but it's basically, the moment of AI takeover is, like, not when the guns start firing. It's the, like, moment of no return much earlier, where you, like, set a ball rolling that you couldn't stop from rolling.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could imagine that, like, for this AI hospital, even maybe before it becomes, like, the AI system becomes situationally aware, there's a point at which Bizarro Vanver, the, like, creator, if he tried to actually shut down the system, would get removed from his position by the other humans around him. Technical difficulties. The picture that I have here, so hospital conglomerate has set up some system, is sort of branching out to, like, take control of as much of the world as it can, both for security reasons and to make it look nicer according to it. um, at some point now, actually I think much earlier in the story, basically humans are no longer making the big decisions about how the world works. And the future from this point looks like how the AI wants it to look instead of how the human wants it to look. Um, this is that feature, I think, is also common to many of my, like, it goes well stories,
Mm.
because I expect it to be the case that there will be these extremely capable systems, and we will basically hand control to those systems. The thing that I'm hoping for is that the preferences of those systems are the way that we want them to be, or we somehow, like, grow together into this galactic civilization, as opposed to, like, well, this one guy setting up this one company, um, accidentally was making the Galactic Empire, and he, like, didn't realize that's what he was doing. My prediction is, or sorry, there's a point that Eliezer Yudkowsky makes, which I am not quite sure that I agree with this ethical claim, but the claim is that, like, human value is fragile, and if you miss one component of it, you can end up with something that looks pretty dystopian rather than utopian. For example, if you, like, forget to include some value related to boredom, then maybe you end up with, like, the sort of best experience being replayed over and over again, like, forever, as opposed to this, like, tremendous variety of positive experiences.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so at this point, the point at which it's kind of achieved situational awareness and has started to model out, like, all right, I should not only prevent the janitor from accidentally unplugging life support systems, I should also prevent the people from unplugging me, and doing things short of that. At this point, the game is lost on this story, whether it's a fast loss, like that a couple days later the AI launches the virus that a few days after that activates in all of our bloodstreams and we're all dead, or a slow loss where it sort of bides its time and makes sure to guard its flank and hide its tracks, as it secures more and more resources. Eliezer is making the claim that not only do we lose control, but it kills us. it literally kills literally all humans. So why that?
Yeah. I think the argument there is mostly the security argument of if you're not getting any benefit from the humans being around and the humans are dangerous to you in some way, then like why not get rid of them? Or sorry, I guess I worded that as like no benefit. It's quite possible that the benefit that a human provides you is real, but is lower than the cost. And in particular, when there's this worry that like, oh, well, these humans made me, maybe they can make something else that's like me that will compete with me in whatever way. I think it's a pretty compelling argument to shutting down industrial civilization from the point of view of one of these AI systems.
Yeah, so I guess the intuition here is like we as humans reasoning about this, just it's hard to decouple our kind of um some sort of like instinctual gut level um sort of system one-y desire to not kill all the humans. But we have to assume that this AI system doesn't have any of that. It's just sort of an open question with no leaning one way or the other.
Right. And in particular, it seems likely to me that it's easier to kill all humans than it is to kill like just some humans. Like if you wanted to get rid of everyone who was good at machine learning or something, um, releasing a super plague will do this. It will also get rid of everyone else. Creating whatever army of like tiny little robots that go out and try to murder individual people, like, seems just way likelier to fail because at some point people will like notice the army of robots and do something about it, and then there will be some machine learning experts, your cover will be blown, all of this stuff. Um,
Okay. And that yeah, the threat of humans creating another AI which could compete with the first AI seems like the critical thing because it's like the comparison often gets made to, you know, humans and ants will kill them without remorse, without second thought. But we're not on a mission to kill all the ants. But if we thought that ants might create um, like an AGI that would then kill all humans or create some other kind of super weapon, then we would see them differently, and maybe we would think we got to get rid of the ants.
right.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, there are people out there who are actively trying to kill all mosquitoes because of malaria.
yeah, yeah. It's there. It feels like there is some tension to me here, though, with the argument that it's if we imagine this thing, imagine kind of an intelligence explosion. Imagine an AI system that is way, way, way more intelligent than humans. Um, it seems like it might also just be so much more intelligent than us that we're not a threat. It's able to monitor all the things that we're doing and foresee all of our plans, all of the plans of every individual human before they have a chance to execute them, and it's just we are as much of a threat to it as ants currently are to us. So there's just no need to wipe us all out.
Yeah, so I think this gets back to the question of like, is it easier to defend against attacks or get rid of the attackers? Right? Like, it may be the case that you can foresee all of the human plans, but many of the human plans look like, and then this person like drops this nuke in this particular place. And so either I can like secretly move everything out of that place ahead of them so that this doesn't move me, or I can like stop them from being able to launch their nuke in the first
Yeah.
place.
Okay. Cool. So I think this is like at least the major plot points of one kind of line through this. So um, that feels like a good place to wrap for today. We've covered only the first or the negative three bullet point in the
Hmm.
preamble, but we got a little bit of orthogonality and instrumental convergence, and then um, we got this sci-fi story that we can work from going forward.
Cool.
Cool.
All right, looking forward to talking
Sounds
more.
good. We do.